2022. All that and more coming up on FreightWaves Now. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome into a brand new week and today's episode of FreightWaves Now. I'm Kaylee Nix here with Anthony Smith.
That's right. And on this Monday edition, we have Mike Baudendistel, who will to talk about the Surface Transportation Board's latest critique of a major railroad. We'll also have the hot seat segment, which Max Farrell from Workhound will join us a little bit later on to talk about driver pay. But first, our top story is going to have to deal a little bit with what's going on with railroads, and we'll have that a little bit later with Rachel Premack. Right now, we're going to go to our first carrier update of the morning.
Good Monday morning. Welcome into this carrier update. I'm Tony Mulvey, joined by Donnie Gilbert. Donnie, you left off Friday giving a prediction about what would happen to diesel fuel over the weekend, and your prediction came to fruition.
Yeah, for the first time in quite some time here, looking at mid-September, we're back below the $5 per gallon mark, which is getting a little bit exciting here. Mm-hmm. Now, there's still plenty more room for this to drop down. It depends on how will the station's owners react and will they follow through and get back in, I don't want to say with compliance, but the way things used to be, having the retail about $1 to $1.20 above the actual wholesale. So here, just throwing some numbers out, we're currently at $4.98. Ultra low, the rack price, which is the wholesale price, is around that $2.82 mark. So here, looking at our second chart here, you can see that our spread on the next chart is still above $2. So here, you know, this is the biggest spread that we've actually ever seen in history.
Yeah.
So, and it's actually dropped back down a few cents, so it's not at his historical high right now, but it's well above $2.
Yeah.
Now, of course, again, the station owners control the price. Is this helpful? Well, it kind of probably hurts those owner operators, even though even if they do have a fuel surcharge in there, they're still probably for the most part paying top dollar the retail price for diesel. Now, of course, this being the largest spread in history right now, this could really help out some of those large carriers, Tony, because they're using the DOE, which is very close to DTS, normally within 1 or 2 cents, as their fuel surcharge price. And then they're having to pay the wholesale price at the pumps. So they're actually making a couple of dollars per gallon now that they pump into those trucks.
Yeah, and the DOE price is weekly, and it comes out on Monday afternoons, right? So they're using that price for the entire week. And in a situation like we see here, we're seeing the rack price move down throughout the week, so that spread is actually widening throughout the week, and it's actually benefiting more than just looking at the spread itself.
As you see, you know, here every Tuesday they start out with a set price, and their cost is going down a little bit. Then it resets, and then their cost goes down. Now, if it was going up like it did, you know, back in October,
it's a squeeze.
It could hurt them a little bit, but it's not. They're actually getting, I guess, the advantage twice over. They're getting, you know, using the wholesale. Next chart here. Let's bounce one more forward here to the NTI here. So still coming down just slightly. We had our peak here right at Thanksgiving. It continued up. It's been moving down over the past few days, but again, we're getting to that 14th, getting close to that 14th, 15th of the month, where each time we saw it start to curve back up some.
Yeah, and I think this is a time, right? I don't think, so you get the bump, obviously, Thanksgiving, and immediately after, like, carriers were able to maintain or gain a little momentum.
Yeah, for a few days here in the December, sure.
And now it's come back a little, right? And it's going to be this give and take. December, again, is one of those interesting months. It's January where it's going to be a whole lot different. It's going to probably look more like what we saw in October than what we see here in December.
We have one more fight coming.
Yep.
And once that fight's over, it's going to be quite some time. It's going to be all the way into spring, almost the beginning of produce season before they'll get their strength back.
Absolutely. Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again a little later. Right now, we'll toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that first carrier update this morning. We're going to welcome in our editorial director, Rachel Premack, who is also the author of the Modes newsletter, talking today a little bit about more issues on the rails. Rachel, it feels like just as we're done with the labor issues, done with the strikes, now we've got pressure being put on the actual railroads themselves, saying, do they maybe need to rewrite the book on the way that they operate? What can you tell us about what's going on?
Yeah, so with PSR, so actually just to zoom out a little bit more, the way that railroads have been operating for the last 10 to 20 years is under this type of management system called Precision Scheduled Railroading, or PSR. And that basically refers to a bundle of various efficiencies and cost-cutting techniques. And we've been talking about it, especially over the last a lot over the past month or so, because PSR was a big reason why we see such a major labor shortage on the railroads. This kind of dates back to pre-COVID, where railroads were slashing staff and slashing headcount. So increasingly, people outside of the management class and within railroad management are starting to see that maybe there's a different way to run these railroads that doesn't involve a lot of, so much efficiency cutting and cost cutting and whatnot. Maybe it's better to have a little bit of wiggle room and therefore be able to, weather out sort of disruptions like what we saw during the pandemic.
And Rachel, with some of these changes, is there any perception that we've seen or heard from the laborers, the folks working on the railroads, or is this really coming from something from the management side?
It does seem to be coming more from the management side. It does also seem to be matching up with a lot of what workers want, which is, a little bit more flexibility in their work. Making sure that we do have more and more staff is definitely something that railroad workers want as well. But it is definitely something that management is looking and saying, okay, we could have taken on all of this intermodal volume during 2021, or we could have captured all of this type of volume or that type of volume, but we couldn't just because we did not have the appropriate level of staffing.
This almost kind of feels like the light bulb moment happening from the management side of the railroads, right? Because you've got the shippers who have been here asking for increased service standards and complaining about the way that the Class 1s have been run here for really now the last 2.5 years. You've got the laborers who are saying, hey, PSR is hurting us, and that's why they were so hesitant to sign a full deal that included PSR standards still. And it was like management was just had this wall up and was not listening. But now it's kind of coming from all sides, right? You've got Surface Transportation Board coming down really heavy on railroad standards. You've got now the shippers once again adding more pressure, and these labor talks are finished. So now railroad management really has no choice but to listen. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if both your customers and the federal government and increasingly even investors are saying, maybe we should try to think about a different way to do this, it's definitely coming from all sides, like you said. And of course, their employees are also saying, and have been saying the loudest and for the longest, we need to really change this. But yeah, as you mentioned, with the shippers, that's kind of one of the most interesting parts of this, because 2021, for example, we've seen railroads be incredibly profitable, incredibly, get having, those incredible profits, but it didn't come because they had really high volumes. In fact, they had pretty poor service for their customers. And it's just an interesting kind of tension, the fact that they were able to make so much money in these past few years, but it's not because they had, incredibly high volumes or anything.
And Rachel, what would be timeline for this look like? So when we see something like some of this precision talks happening, what would be the timeline? And okay, maybe we can implement this and have it actually in practice.
Yeah, so some railroad companies have already reopened hump yards. Closing hump yards, these sort of sortation facilities, was kind of one of the key traits of PSR, and they've already started to reopen some of those hump yards. Hiring, that's been going on, throughout the industry for the past year. They've been investing quite a bit into hiring in that ways. But yeah, really, and also several railroad companies are also trying to reintroduce locomotives and other equipment that they put out of commission. So they're already, undoing certain classic, typical PSR things essentially, but they still aren't saying, oh, we're done with PSR. They're very much saying we are still doing PSR. But it's definitely, one analyst called it to me PSR 2.0. So you still have these, streamlining, but you also aren't maybe as streamlined as you were, a few years back.
So with PSR 1.0, PSR 2.0, we're also starting to see a lot of technological innovation in rail yards, and things like automation maybe starting to work in with the way that trains are run. Where does that automation and that tech innovation kind of sit when you talk about PSR versus other strategies of running a railroad?
Yeah, so that tech-enabled solutions, those are definitely really important. And one way, looking specifically into PSR, that's important is by cutting staff again. So they're looking at various automation ways that they can automate and use machine learning and whatnot to do rail maintenance instead of having someone checking, each of the cars or each of the the tracks themselves. Instead, you can use a more automated way to get that done. The other way is that there's still been a lot of conversation around getting rid of the conductor and just having a one-person manned train, essentially. So you no longer have two people in the train, you have one person in the train, and that obviously cuts labor costs because you're only paying that one person. But these are other sorts of, it's not classic PSR because, that PSR was developed many years ago, so we didn't really have these sort of automated solutions aimed at the conductor job back then. But yeah, this is another sort of way to cut labor and drive efficiencies.
There's going to be more exciting times potentially ahead as we get into the next round of negotiations, especially for the railroads. Rachel, real quick, are there any sneak peeks for any stories that you're working on in the coming week?
So I'm actually going to be writing something hopefully today or tomorrow on cardboard demand is down, or cardboard output is down to 2009 levels, which is definitely a worrisome sign for the broader economy. And just looking into some other more holiday shopping stories, possibly something around fuel and something around inflation. Why we're seeing, gas, well, as we just learned in the previous segments, fuel is starting to come down in price, but fuel and food and all these sorts of essentials are still really expensive, relatively really expensive. But TVs, air fryers, these are all things that are randomly really inexpensive. I'm sure most consumers would prefer the opposite, but yeah, looking into kind of why we have this two-sided inflation.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. And I think you're spot on, especially with the with the producer price index elevated over this last report. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll check up with those stories.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Right now, we're going to head over to Kaylee Nix, who is doing it all and has today's first look at headlines.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. Time for our first check of top stories on FreightWaves.com. The Government Accountability Office is critiquing the U.S.'s ability to keep up with demands of shipping through the ice of the Arctic due to a lack of assets being deployed in the region. Record low levels of sea ice have made the Arctic more navigable than ever and have increased shipping opportunities, which presents potential economic opportunities, but can also lead to safety and environmental risks due to the lack of infrastructure in the region. The number of vessels in the U.S. Arctic has more than doubled since 2009. It also remains on an upward trend. Most shipping there is just transporting goods from Arctic communities to communities, but shipping through the region is also expected to increase. Mexico and Canada have recently won a trade dispute against the United States on car content rules that govern auto manufacturing. A dispute resolution panel set up by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement made a preliminary ruling on November 14th, but the full report has not yet been made public. The Mexican Undersecretary of Foreign Trade said that the full ruling will be made public in January. The dispute covers different interpretations for calculating a vehicle's regional value content, including classification of parts. Mexico and Canada have more flexibility in their value calculations, while the U.S. is more strict. And the United States Capitol is getting in the Christmas spirit thanks to a delivery from Hardy Brothers Trucking. The company delivered the official Capitol Christmas tree driven by husband and wife team drivers Deb and Ed Kingdon. This is the first time that a female driver has helped deliver the tree, which boasts being from the mountains of the U.S. to the sea. The drivers get to make the drop-off in a customized truck, and this was the first time that the couple had ever hauled oversized freight. For those headlines and more, you can head on over to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe to stay updated. For the full FreightWaves experience, you can head on over to tv.freightwaves.com or download our app. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have our first check of weather for the day. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Hold on a second, Tony. See that? No scrapes, no scuffs, no damage. Thank you. Because we make sure each pallet is touched as few times as possible and that is handled with care, no matter where it's going. That's the precision you get from a nationwide LTL freight company with over 35 years of industry-leading experience, an entire team that's driven to deliver on time and damage-free.
XPO, your freight, first.
What are you doing up there, Bert?
The RXO folks want us to demo their technology.
That's smart.
Yeah, not really. My beak doesn't work so well on this tablet.
Well, they're paying us now, so.
I know, here goes. Our customers' freight is seamlessly moved anywhere in North America using RXO's digital platform to access over 1.5 million trucks.
That sounded good.
I think I broke my beak.
Massive capacity, cutting-edge technology. RXO.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this Monday morning. It's time for our first check of the weather. We've got a pretty substantial winter storm setting up across the northern Great Plains, eventually set to move in across the Midwest and bring some snow everywhere from the mountains of the West down through the Great Lakes, maybe even possibly some dustings in the Mid-South to Mid-Atlantic by the time that we're done with this one. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. Our map kind of lit up like a Christmas tree here for us. We've got blizzard warnings. Let's start off with that in the purple here across western South Dakota, western Nebraska, eastern Wyoming, and the far northeast corner of Colorado. That does include Interstate 76, Interstate 80, all the way up to I-90 in all of those states as well. And we are starting to see some snowfall come down, and we're not quite to those blizzard conditions yet, but the wind's expected to pick up and become very strong, pretty dangerous by this afternoon into this evening. We've got a live look at one of the traffic cameras right now outside of I-80, just to the east of Cheyenne, Wyoming right now. This is what the roads look like, so not too bad as far as the blowing snow conditions go, but if we can pull up that traffic camera, you can see that there is some snow coating the roads, the interstates so far. Most of them have been salted and there are plows out, but as the conditions deteriorate, it's going to make travel difficult, if not impossible at some times. Those winds going to be coming out of the north-northwest, so anything that runs to the north-south of those interstates, I-25 specifically, going to be looking for those crosswinds impacting drivers today, tomorrow, and into your Wednesday. Total snowfall from this storm is going to vary pretty widely depending on where you're at. And thanks to those high winds, we will be kind of hard-pressed to find a true snow depth because it leads to blowing snow, which leads to drifting, which makes it hard to actually measure. But overall, everyone really from the corners of Montana through the Dakotas into Nebraska, then eventually into Kansas, Oklahoma, and then into the middle parts of the Midwest tomorrow into Wednesday need to be prepared for this major winter storm. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means for the Deep South with a severe weather threat coming up later on in the show. Right now, we're going to toss it over to Isaiah Buchanan, who's got our first check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and we're starting things off talking about NASA today. Their Orion spacecraft splashed down yesterday in the Pacific Ocean. Look at this video right here. This is a video of the spacecraft landing, or what was left of it, landing in the Pacific Ocean yesterday. So the main goal of this spacecraft was it flew around the moon a total of 1.4 million miles, and the goal was to test whether or not the Orion spacecraft could safely carry humans. Now, this launched back on November the 16th, so it took about 25 days, and during the entire time, like I said, it traveled about 1.4 million miles. It got up to 32 times the speed of sound, and because it was moving so fast, the outside of that spacecraft heated up to over 5,000 degrees. So hopefully this will help NASA and astronauts know what needs to be done in order for us to make it to where we can get people back on the moon. Now, switching things up just a little bit, we've been talking all about different kinds of Christmas, what's your favorite Christmas movie by state, and today we're talking about favorite Christmas candy by state. Now, CandyStore.com put out this chart right here that shows the favorite candy, Christmas candy by each state. Now, they surveyed 16,000 customers, distributors, and manufacturers to make up their list of people who were tested to figure out which candy was the favorite in each state. Now, Tennessee's right here in Freight Alley, the number one was peppermint bark, number two was candy canes, and number three was chocolate Santas. Now, overall, chocolate was probably the most favorite. You'll see a lot of Reese's, you see a lot of Snickers, and a lot of Hershey's on there, and chocolate Santas, of course, as well. You can't forget the chocolate Santas. So that's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, we're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony. Guys, what's your favorite Christmas candy?
Anthony, I don't think that you like sweets, if I remember right.
I'm going with Sour Patch Kids all year round.
Sour Patch Kids, okay, I can't hate on that. Like, I actually do love Sour Patch Kids also. But I gotta say, I had my first Christmas tree cake when I first moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee in the South, 4.5 years ago? Delicious.
Christmas tree cake?
Yeah, like the Little Debbie Christmas tree cake.
Oh, I've seen those. I hated them.
Okay, they kind of taste like if you took some like crumbly Play-Doh and dipped it in a crayon and put sprinkles on it, but like in the best way because it's Christmassy.
Kind of reminds me of like a Christmas zebra cake a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Okay.
All right,
I don't like it at all.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Right now, we're going to welcome our next live guest. We've got Max Farrell from Workhound joining us just from down the street here in Chattanooga. Max, we got to ask, do you have a favorite Christmas candy or treat, and is it a Little Debbie product? Because we're here in chat.
Oh man, the chocolate Santas are always a good time. You can't go wrong with that. Now the difference is a lot of folks will do the hollow ones, but you're really just cheating yourself. So you got to go find the full chocolate Santa, not the hollow one.
Okay, I agree with that. I agree with that. Max, thank you so much again for joining us. We're going to talk a little bit about driver pay right now. Coming up on the end of 2022, we've seen some really interesting trends now coming out of the pandemic, out of this high rate cycle, and drivers are maybe feeling it a little bit in their pockets. Where are we sitting right now to round out the year from driver pay statistics?
Yeah, so at Workhound we gather driver feedback from drivers all across North America, and they share open-ended feedback, good, bad, and ugly. And so a lot of them, unprompted, have been talking about pay. When we looked in 2021, pay was the top critical theme that we saw. So these are critical comments where drivers explicitly stating their intention or their desire to leave the company. And when we took a glance at the data again as we wind down the year, what we saw is that that amount of critical comments for pay has actually increased. It's making up 20% of all those comments. And actually in the spring and summer, pay accounted for over 25% of all critical comments. So even though the markets may be shifting a little bit, what we're seeing is that pay is still a top issue for drivers and really can be that make or break thing for them in the industry, if they're going to stick with a company or not.
And Max, when you're looking at this as a big factor and a big variable here, what are going to be some of the other aspects that go around into it? I mean, I know pay transparency and just knowing when someone's going to get paid definitely have to go a long way as well.
Yeah, so certainly a lot of people latch on to the idea that the pay issue is an amount issue. Yeah, I want more money. But really, the issues when it comes down to pay, if you want to simplify it, it's that people are saying, I don't understand my pay or I feel like it's incorrect. And so as companies, what we have to map out are what are the things that we can control and what are the things that we really can't control. So you think about the things that are hard to control due to macroeconomic circumstances. Equipment's definitely a big factor. It's been tougher to get new equipment, and the truck is not only a driver's job often, it's their home and their tool to do it. And so that's always one of those challenging things where if we can't do something about it, we should at least communicate what we're trying to do to help them. But the things that we can do is, from a company standpoint, are things like communication. Really going above and beyond to make sure that drivers understand their pay, because if you don't understand your pay, you're going to fill the void with your worst thoughts and fears if there is a miscommunication out there. So companies owe it to their people to make pay easy, transparent, and predictable as much as possible, because the variability of knowing that you may make $300 one week or $2,000 the next is tough to call home about and say, yeah, I don't know how much I'm going to be sending you guys. So consistency is a big theme that we're seeing innovative carriers embrace.
I think that's a really huge point, is that it's not always about the number, right? Because you can know, like, hey, this is my overarching yearly salary, but it's about how can I expect it to be that up? How can I plan? How can I have security and safety for myself and maybe the family that I'm taking care of, or the investments that I have to nurture, or the payments that I have to make? And a lot of that can cause some undue stress and really add to job hesitancy or make you kind of always be looking for outside opportunities, right? Because nobody likes to feel insecure about their finances. As a company, if you're really looking to bump your retention numbers and increase your retention overall, how can you incorporate either pay transparency, or I almost want to call it pay integrity, right? If your company's saying, I'm going to pay you this much on this day, and here's what you can expect through this platform, you got to stick to it. You got to have integrity with what you're telling your employees.
Yeah, I'd say one of the first things, integrity is a great word, and it really comes down to simplicity first and foremost. If you think about a lot of the bonus programs that are out there to get a couple extra $100 for safety or fuel, there's so many if this then that scenarios where you honestly have to sit down with a CFO to understand the spreadsheet numbers to determine what is somebody actually going to make. And so if a driver feels like a company is moving the goalpost for them to get their pay, that starts to create mistrust. And pay is one of those things where you cannot break trust, because otherwise, if you're not going to give me the thing I need to go take care of my people at home, then I'm going to go elsewhere where I feel like I'll be taken care of. So simplicity is certainly a big thing. Bonuses have been a big challenge, as I mentioned, but also people having an idea of what they're going to take home home. So we're seeing more and more companies embrace the idea of guaranteed pay, where it's saying, hey, if you're showing up and doing these things, you're in the truck, you're doing good work, and there's variables out there, let's say there's weather or a shipper delays for a long time, we're still going to pay you X amount. And that can mean the world to people to know I'm going to be taken care of even if there's a bad week due to circumstances outside of my control. So those are a couple of things out there, is keep pay simple and make it predictable.
Max, in your experience, do drivers have any feedback about non-monetary payments that maybe they're being offered by companies? I think a lot of times for folks who are in a maybe 9-to-5 traditional office job, you see a lot of, hey, take an extra PTO day for your pay, or you get a pizza in the break room instead of, monetary pay. And sometimes we take issue with that, but is there any type of program like that where drivers either enjoy it or don't enjoy it? And are they giving that kind of feedback as well?
Yeah, the core thing is that people want to do good work. I know that there's talk out there of that drivers don't want to work as hard, but there's plenty of people out there that want to do good work. We just have to make it easy for them to do it and not overcomplicate things. Now, as far as the additional benefits beyond pay, we are seeing companies take a good look at their benefits packages to see how do we go above and beyond the table stakes type things. So, of course, all benefits packages are going to have medical, vision, and dental, but what are the other things that you can provide? Is it a solid retirement plan and actually give people some financial literacy? Are there there's people out there that are wanting to provide some ways for families to actually go get started. So there's a number of different initiatives out there that companies are looking at. Some are even looking at mental health as another thing. So companies saying, hey, we do benefits plus, that can mean a lot to their drivers.
And Max, where do bonuses really kind of fit into all this? I know whenever I see sign-up bonuses, for a lot of drivers, a lot of carriers, it seems like this big shiny thing that's really cool up front, and then you work your minimum amount of days until you can receive that bonus, and then sometimes people just kind of fall off. Does that really kind of help kind of build out retention or just kind of get people into the door?
Bonuses are sugar water, sign-on bonuses especially, and it's strictly a handshake agreement to say this is getting you in the door to our company sooner than it would have. So the companies that are expecting a sign-on bonus is somehow going to lead to driver loyalty are fooling themselves, because when somebody's coming on, they're saying, okay, I left my job because you gave me an extra, let's say $5,000. Now we're starting on a clean slate. You got me to move. Now you got to make sure that I feel like this is my company of choice. And the company has to work their tail off in that first 90, 180 days to show we are the company of choice that you can trust, rely on, and build a career with.
It's going to be interesting to watch and to see this conversation continue to develop. Max, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you as always.
Hey, thank you all. Have a great one.
You as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back with more FreightWaves Now right after this.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
So, you need to reroute a large shipment from LA to Boston. With XPO, you can make it happen with one call to right here, an XPO team with local connections that will help find a solution. We've spent over 35 years perfecting LTL freight operations to make it easy for our customers to do business with us. Why? Because we're driven to be the best.
XPO, your freight first.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation, inflation, inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Can RXO get truckloads of grass to Pittsburgh every month?
Who do you know in Pittsburgh?
Lots of cousins. Always complaining about the grass there.
The grass is bad in Pittsburgh.
Right? It's bitter, like a cruciferous vegetable.
Well, with RXO, you can access over 1.5 million trucks, any mode of transportation, even flatbeds. Just log in.
There's a log right there.
You know what cruciferous means, but not log in?
I'm a complicated creature.
Massive capacity, cutting edge technology. RXO.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now on this carrier update. Donnie, it's Monday. Obviously, that means we're going to talk about the reefer market. What's going on there?
So we're seeing a little bit of a pickup in volumes, just a little bit. Nothing to be overly excited about just yet. But then again, as I said, kind of watch. We're here. Today's the 12th. Getting into the latter part of this week, it will be time for y'all to start pushing your rates up, putting pressure on shippers, and trying to, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be in getting it to roll in your favor. And the reason I say that is, we looked at it historically, and you see it start picking up around the 12th to the 15th, you start seeing rejection rates going up. Well, it's that time again, and if everybody starts working together and start pushing those prices up, put pressure on the shippers with higher prices, you might be able to get those prices going up a couple of days early.
Well, and this year, it's kind of interesting, right? Because if you think about how the Christmas holiday works, it's on the weekend. So you have Christmas Eve, if that typically was a holiday and receivers were closed. Well, now they're closed on Friday and Monday after Christmas, right? Because you have the 2 business days. Maybe.
Maybe and maybe not. And this is why. Sometimes when you're the big receivers or the big shippers, they may let you off on Christmas Day. They're probably not going to let you off on New Year's Eve or the day after Christmas, like the advantage that we get of being in the office.
Yeah.
When you're in the truck, when you're in the warehouses, you don't always get that. Yeah. Now, they might be closed. What they'll probably do is close maybe the 3rd shift Friday night. So if you were to come in at 7, 8 p.m. on Friday night, they may let you off then, and then maybe reopen at maybe noon or the afternoon shift that was off on Friday evening, start the reopening Sunday evening. Yeah. So there will be, it will be better. There'll be more availability to pick up and deliver because it's on a Saturday this year than it would be if it fell like on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
So there will be some interruptions, but Tony, I still think a lot of your drivers are just going to go home this year because they're not going to be able to make as much money through the holidays or between the holidays.
That's what I was going to say. It feels like this is the year with it kind of falling on a weekend. Like naturally they were going to come off the road anyway for a weekend if they could, and now there's like the incentive, it's the holiday, right? So now they definitely want to be home. So it's like this.
Yeah, and I think we're not going to make a whole lot of extra money through this holiday period, so I might as well go home and be with my family.
Yep.
Which actually might help the ones that actually are going to stay out or plan on or being forced to stay out.
Yep.
They possibly could now if let's say capacity is, let's say 10% normally stays out. Now it's only going to be 5%. It very well could. But, at least it'll be a little bit easier on the truck drivers. They can pick up on Friday and deliver on Monday, probably just like normal, and the holiday be somewhere in between.
Yep.
Let's pop in here and go to the next chart here. Then again, right here is what I was kind of talking about. Outbound tender lead times. We're back to kind of the norm, right around maybe just above just a hair. But there's no pressure on shippers right now. Nope. But keep an eye on this as well. If you can start putting upward pressure on them, you may see this reverse and start to climb back up very slowly. But as we get closer to Christmas, you'll see a peak like this again.
Yeah.
But not right. It's got to work its way back, and this is going to be Christmas right around in here. So a few days before Christmas, a few days after Christmas, you're going to see it peak.
Absolutely. Well, Donnie, thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you again in the second hour. Right now, we'll toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that update. We're going to welcome in Mike Baudendistel, our head of intermodal solutions and CPG expert here at FreightWaves Now. Mike, staying on the intermodal side today and talking about the Surface Transportation Board having some critiques of Union Pacific around their use of embargoes. We're going to talk about this in headlines today as well, but give us kind of a broad overview of the situation of how UP has been using embargoes.
Sure. So we're primarily focused here on not intermodal volume, but rail carload volume. So what Union Pacific has done is they've really heavily used embargoes, which has been a way to deal with congestion. Like, for instance, usually the embargo would be used if, let's say, there was a hurricane or snowstorm, or if their rail tracks were underwater in a flood. But they've used them more heavily recently, just in response to dealing with congestion, not having enough crews. Maybe if there's lots of congestion at a terminal in Chicago, they embargo sending trains inbound to Chicago because that's just going to cause more congestion at that major location. So they've been avoiding things like that, but it really has contributed to sort of poor service. And the U.S. Surface Transportation Board, which we talked about a little bit earlier, they're the organization that oversees the economic regulation of the railroads, has singled out Union Pacific as being the one railroad that has been the most egregious in using these embargoes. Have a chart that I can throw up that shows how much those have increased. So this is directly from the U.S. Surface Transportation Board docket, and you see 2017 they used 27 embargoes. And look how quickly that's gone up. In 2022, 886, and that was as of the end of October. I believe there's been another like 100 and some just in November and early December. So, and then the other thing I would highlight there is just, you go back to 2017, and 70% of those were caused by weather. 11% were caused by some catastrophic event, I don't know, hurricane or something. And here we go in 2022, 98% are caused by congestion. Well, what's congestion? Why is there congestion? Why you need an embargo? Surface Transportation Board is trying to get to the bottom of these things. They called on Union Pacific to submit documentation explaining that, which they came back with this PowerPoint presentation that's up on the Surface Transportation Board that really didn't address the issues. It didn't look like they spent a lot of time on it, honestly. They talked a little bit about, repositioning private cars. So those would be cars that are owned by, shippers or leasing companies, and really didn't get to the crux of the issue. And Surface Transportation Board let them know. There's a letter sent to Union Pacific by the STB chairman, Marty Oberman, that said, you didn't address sort of why there were these congestion issues. Did you not have enough employees? And so they're going to get to the bottom of this, hopefully, during this STB hearing on both tomorrow and Wednesday. And what sort of stands out to me is not just that they singled out this one, carrier, not just that the embargoes have increased, so much, but just how many different constituencies are being brought on to testify. Of course, there's a panel of Union Pacific executives, and they brought their lawyer there. So I think there's 5 individuals from Union Pacific testifying, but also a lot of the heavy hitters in the shipper community, which you'd expect that too. Guys like Cargill, a lot of the chemical companies, Grain and Feed Association, which was part of the issue with not having the animal feed. But they're also bringing in a lot of the union organizations to testify about, is really the issue. You just couldn't get, the employees, which is really the main thing that the railroads have blamed a lot of this congestion on. They say, well, it's a tight job market for everyone, railroads no exception. And that's what was causing a lot of these problems. Is it that, or do they not really invest in their network, not have enough passing sidings, and just not have enough equipment in the right places, all of those things that is causing a lot of these things. So I'm expecting a lot of fireworks. I mean, if you think if 2-day meeting in D.C. with government officials sounds dull, then you probably haven't heard how the STB chairman, Marty Oberman, questions the railroads. I would describe him as a pit bull in a bow tie.
And Mike, when we're looking at the situation, is there any one decision maker that a lot of these embargoes are coming down to, or does it just kind of seem to be something that's happening within the organization?
I mean, that's a question that needs to be addressed. I mean, that was one of the things that STB wants to know is how do you determine when an embargo is issued? Just what goes into that decision? And that was another thing that Union Pacific didn't address in the materials. And I think that's going to be a big topic. So hopefully we find out in the next couple days.
And this is super interesting to watch because you've seen now shippers specifically saying, hey, there's all of these problems with the railroads. And I think UP has been at the forefront of a lot of those issues, especially around the Chicago area recently as well. And is this going to be kind of this, like, kind of bringing it all to a head now? We mentioned earlier with Rachel now, you're seeing pressure from upper railroad management now coming down on the railroads themselves, from the shippers and from the federal government. And it's kind of like, you have to listen at this point, right?
I think that's right. I think, this year was one of the most unusual things that happened this year was the Surface Transportation Board ordered Union Pacific to prioritize certain grain feed shipments into these, food companies to feed the animals and basically prioritize these trains above other trains that, the other trains are probably more profitable for Union Pacific. And that's why those trains weren't being prioritized. So certain like service orders like that, could come more frequently with a Surface Transportation Board that is more active, more shipper friendly. So I think it does send a message to the railroads that they're going to have some redundancy built into their cost structures for when volumes rise, because volumes always go up and down, and you can't just have sort of the bare minimum to move the base load level of freight, and then any surge in demand, you can't handle it because those things are always going to happen.
Mike, you talk about any topics. You have Stockout coming on a little bit later today. When can people catch that, and is there a newsletter attached to that?
Yeah, so the Stockout comes out at 2 p.m. Eastern. So go through just what is happening in world of consumer packaged goods, CPGs, their suppliers, their customers, which are the retailers, and also do a newsletter that comes out twice a week. And go to www.freightwaves.com/the Stockout, thinking that 2023 is going to be a better year from the perspective of the CPG companies, because it does seem like their cost inflation is past its peak and should be able to get some margin back that they lost the past couple of years.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us this morning, and appreciate you being on. And we'll be sure to catch you on that next edition of the Stockout.
Great. Good to see you, Anthony.
Right now, we're going to head over to Kaylee Nix, who has our next look at today's weather.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. And as we ramp up that winter storm out in the west, finally getting a little bit of a break in the active weather for us here across the southeast, where it has rained for 7 consecutive days here across Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that includes all of Middle Tennessee, out towards West Tennessee, even up towards Middle Kentucky. But we're starting to see a break in that rain for today into tomorrow, as we get ready for our first big fall severe weather event. So we typically have 2 different severe weather seasons across the southeast. You've got that traditional one that happens in the spring when we see most tornadoes, but there's also this secondary severe weather season that comes in the late fall to early winter, as we see those pretty robust winter storms set up, and we get a really good opportunity for some really strong straight line storms that often include embedded tornadoes. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events right now. We've got the radar up, and really for the first time, as I mentioned, in just about a week, we've got no rain falling across the Middle Tennessee area. This is good news because you do have some areas that have had some flooding going on, specifically around the West Tennessee area. Memphis out towards northern Mississippi, northern parts of Alabama also saw some minor flooding. For us here in Chattanooga, our river is just below that crest level. That's pretty standard, so we could be seeing a little bit more rise as some of that runoff continues to flow into the river. But what we're going to be watching here is the available moisture in place for that severe weather event that will be happening tomorrow on into Wednesday. So for us here across the southeast, as we continue to see the rain dissipate, we're going to get a better opportunity for the sun to come back in, which is going to allow for more warmth, which is bad news on the severe weather front, because that means that you have more power and more strength for those storms to go off of. First thing that we're going to be watching is our day 1 outlook across the central parts of Kansas, Oklahoma, and northwest Texas. This will be today. Tomorrow's threat is going to shift down to the deeper parts of the south and to the Gulf Coast. That does include East Texas and central Louisiana. Just to the north of the I-10 corridor does include I-49 and I-20. So we'll touch a little bit more in depth on the threats for tomorrow later on in the show. Right now, though, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What are you doing up there, Bert?
The RXO folks want us to demo their technology.
That's smart.
Yeah, not really. My beak doesn't work so well on this tablet.
Well, they're paying us now, so...
I know, here goes. Our customers' freight is seamlessly moved anywhere in North America using RXO's digital platform to access over 1.5 million trucks.
That sounded good.
I think I broke my beak.
Massive capacity, cutting-edge technology. RXO.
This is an LTL freight cross-dock facility, and we have locations like this all across North America. East Coast, West Coast, even our neighbors to the north and south. At XPO, our network helps us deliver 18 billion pounds of freight every year to 99% of US zip codes and beyond. And now, it's getting even bigger because we're adding 900 new doors to our terminals. XPO, your freight first.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is a segment we like to call Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Well, NASA's Orion spacecraft just landed in the Pacific Ocean. This happened yesterday after a 25-day mission. Take a look at this video they posted on Twitter. So this spacecraft launched on November the 16th, and it took a trip around the moon, traveled around 1.4 million miles. It actually got up to 32 times the speed of sound on its trip, and because of that, the spacecraft heated up to over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So the object of this mission was to collect data to see if the Orion spacecraft would be capable of successfully transporting humans to the moon, because the U.S. is currently working on trying to get humans back to the moon. It's been over 50 years since we've been there. So hopefully this trip will help put them in the right direction to see if we can eventually get people back to the moon. Now, switching things up just a little bit, we've talked all about favorite Christmas movies, favorite Christmas snacks, and now take a look at this favorite Christmas candy that Candy Store put out. This is the list of all 50 states and their favorite Christmas candy. This was put out by candystore.com, and they surveyed over 16,000 customers, distributors, and manufacturers to compile this chart. Now, if you take a look, peppermint bark is still pretty popular now. It has lost some of its popularity over the years. It is still #1 in Tennessee and in 5 other states, but now you're really starting to see chocolate emerge as a really big front runner. So there's different kinds of chocolate, of course. Reese's, Hershey's, and Snickers are probably the most popular on this chart that you'll see around the United States. In Georgia, Snickers, I'm a Georgia boy. I can go with the Snickers, but I don't know if I would consider it my favorite Christmas candy. We want to know what your favorite Christmas candy is. Leave us a comment on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and let us know what your favorite Christmas candy is. That's all I have for this edition of Social Roundabout. But right now, we're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in freight with our market update.
All right, Anthony, it's kind of almost the last week of the year, and we are getting excited for our last event of the year here at FreightWaves.
That's right, coming up this week, and there's still time. You can get registered and tune in to our next virtual event and our final virtual event of the year, and that's the Domestic Supply Chain Summit.
Talking all things shipping here across the U.S. I've got a pretty exciting fireside chat about the role of VC and the staying power of capital in freight tech. We're going to cover everything from that. We've got some great keynotes in place. We'll have a live What the Truck from Dooner, of course, and we're giving away a door prize.
That's right. Once you register, you are going to be eligible for our free giveaway, and that's going to be a smart speaker set, of course, from Sonos.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe you made some good connections at the Future Freight Festival back in November. Maybe you want to shake some virtual hands, maybe some new ones, maybe some old ones. This is the perfect place to do that. You've got networking opportunities. You've got free registration, as Anthony mentioned. You don't even have to budget for this event because you ain't got to go anywhere. Just to live.freightwaves.com to get registered and tune in. And if you miss any of that content, where can we find it afterwards?
Of course, you can go to tv.freightwaves.com and watch it all on demand.
Absolutely. So head on over, get registered for that. While you're there, start planning out your 2023 calendar as well, because we have our virtual events and our live event dates posted as well. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back to start off your second hour of FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
When you have thousands of trucks delivering billions of pounds of freight, you need the right equipment, the right technology, and the right team. At XPO, we provide tuition-free training at 130 XPO driver schools across the country, and the tools drivers need to be at the top of their game, providing rewarding careers for our team members and top-notch service for our customers, while continuing to deliver LTL freight on time and damage-free. XPO, your freight first.
Can so get truckloads of grass to Pittsburgh every month?
Who do you know in Pittsburgh?
Lots of cousins. Always complaining about the grass there.
The grass is bad in Pittsburgh.
Right? It's bitter, like a cruciferous vegetable.
Well, with RXO, you can access over 1.5 million trucks, any mode of transportation, even flatbeds. Just log in.
There's a log right there.
You know what cruciferous means, but not log in?
I'm a complicated creature.
Massive capacity, cutting-edge technology. RXO.
Welcome into the second hour of FreightWaves Now. Starting off with the carrier update, Donnie. Looking at a map here, looking at some of the changes going on in the reefer market.
So there are still a little bit of changes. You see, a little bit of red in Atlanta. Through the Midwest here, you see some red here, but we talked about last week the Pacific Northwest, which we don't pay a lot of attention to the Pacific Northwest because 11 months, 10 months out of the year, it's a very difficult and a backhaul market.
Yep.
So it's starting to pick up. We saw it out of Seattle. We're going to check in and check out the Seattle market a little bit later on here. But we'll just kind of look at the weekly changes. What have improved with rejection rates and what have declined in rejection rates? You see a little bit more in the Southeast here. Mm-hmm. You start seeing rejection rates starting to pick up. Arkansas, rejection rates picking up. Again, Chicago, Joliet down. The Northeast kind of holding steady here. The ones that are white here are holding steady.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you look at that includes some of the largest reefer markets. I mean, obviously, you got Ontario, Fresno, markets like that. But then Fort Worth, right? You're next to Dallas. You think Dallas kind of is that over big, strong market, and it is on the dry van side. Fort Worth, primarily reefer.
We're going to pull Dallas one more lanes of the day today. Next chart here, I'm kind of interested. This, Tony, is a volume chart, and it shows the yearly change, similar to our OTMS. You can't break the OTMS yearly change down by drive-in or reefer, but we're just looking at the actual volume change. What markets are smaller this time of year compared to last year, and what markets are a little bit bigger? Now, this isn't the whole idea where it's added to 100%. This is just looking at basing the market compared to that same market a year ago. But this is kind of interesting to see. You see a lot of red. Volumes are down. We know that. We understand that. But here in the Southeast here, we see Chattanooga has increased a little bit year over year in volumes. Macon, Georgia, Savannah, and I think it's Greenville over here. These might be some markets here, Kentucky, that you might want to look at and see, is there enough capacity to be moving this freight out of these markets? If you have the opportunity to deliver one of your contracted loads into Chattanooga, would you do it? Would you look? Or you might want to also go to your dashboard, your market dashboard, and run some lanes, run your reverse lanes going back and see maybe what the spot rates are. You might be surprised. It might be a lot better of a return load than you think.
Yeah, and I think one that was interesting, it was on the last map, it's on this one, Savannah, right? I mean, we're going to look at it on the lanes of the day, but just a little preview. But what you're seeing, right, the market is tightening, rejection rates are up, and volume levels have grown over the past year. So especially when you look at a sea of red, and even on the rejection side, all that area in the middle of the country is in that reddish color where rejection rates are falling. So, I mean, it's using all these indexes together to form.
Yeah, and if you're going to survive a bust market, like I said kind of last week, you have to improve your customer service, make you stand out. You also have to get out of the box and operate in a little bit of a different way. You can't just sit there and do what you did. You need to operate. You need to get comfortable with different markets, shifting your trucks, doing something a little bit different to help keep your profits, your company profitable, or at least in business.
Absolutely, Donnie. Thank you so much for this update. We'll be sure to check in with you one more time before the end of the show. Right now, we'll toss it over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, y'all. Thank you for that carrier update. It's time now to welcome in our editor-at-large. We've got John Kinston joining us to talk about another development in the California AB5 saga. John, thanks for being here. What's up now with California? It just seems like this won't die.
Oh, no, it's not going to die. It's going to be going on for a long time. So let's go a little bit. Let's first recap. The injunction that kept AB5 out of trucking was handed down New Year's Eve on 2019. That was overturned by an appellate court in April 2021. They brought it to the Supreme Court at the end of June this year. The Supreme Court said they weren't going to review it, which basically does two things. It kicks the case back to the district court, the lower court, and it removes the injunction. But the case itself had never really been fully litigated. So really, we're starting all over. So what happened was there was an agreement among the parties last week that was filed with the court that kind of set a calendar for when briefs are going to be required and when the next hearing is on the case itself. And that the next hearing is not till I think it's May 1st, which means you can't see a new injunction. There was always the prospect of a new injunction, maybe on different grounds, handed down. You're not going to see that before May. The one thing that happened is, OIDA, the Organization of Independent Owner-Operators, has joined with the California Trucking Association as a member in this case. So the other thing that happened is that OIDA actually did already file its request for an injunction, even though the deadline for a request for an injunction isn't not till next month. And what they did is kind of expected. They're arguing that AB5 is in violation of federal law because it intersects, or basically it's blotted out by the Dormant Commerce Clause, which is where the federal government and not states it regulates interstate commerce, and states can't do anything to interfere with that. that argument was part of the original CTA, California Trucking Association case back in 2019, but it never got a hearing because the injunction that was handed down involved conflict with another federal rule. So the question of whether AB 5 for trucking interferes with the Commerce Clause has never really been adjudicated. So that's where we are. We've got OOIDA's request for an injunction, but barring something truly astounding, there's not going to be a ruling on a request for an injunction until May 1st.
And John, as we get closer to that date, does this really kind of continue to push a lot of activity to the East Coast, keeping it there? Or is really what we're seeing in California going to likely be the types of volume that we can really expect going into and throughout 2023?
Well, I don't really know what you've seen so far. I don't know that you can make a conclusion about what the impact has been. I will tell you that I've been going crazy this morning trying to get a copy of a press release that came out of the city of Los Angeles on Friday. I know it exists, that the city of LA has reached agreement with at least 5 trucking companies regarding misclassification, and they're citing adherence to AB 5 as the reason. You know, you had the Universal Logistics deal with the Teamsters that took a lot of independent owner-operators, independent drayage drivers, and made them employees. So you're seeing that companies are not waiting for anything. They are getting stuff done. So, I think your question is a long-term one, whether AB 5, as well as maybe some other things, pushes freight to other markets, pushes inbound ocean-going freight to other markets. You know, one thing, when I went to Rail Trends a few weeks ago, the CEO of Kansas City Southern was saying, look, once the KCS CP deal is done, there's a port on the Pacific side of Mexico, so you don't have to go through the canal, and you'll be able to have a continuous rail connection from there, one company from there all the way to Chicago. So is that a factor too? So, you throw AB 5 into the mix with everything else, and we'll see how it plays out.
Feels like for a lot of this, it's kind of been this hurry up and wait situation with AB 5, right? Like we saw the injunction finally get tossed back down to the district court, and then everybody in California was like, how is this going to affect us? Only to come to find out, like, well, we're not going to know until you get served with something that says, hey, this is affecting you, right? And it's been kind of now this overlooming shadow over the California trucking industry for a while. Have you seen any numbers on any folks who are now leaving California? Are we still not quite seeing that trend yet either?
No, because really, let's remember something. The target of this was not interstate drivers. The target of this really, well, maybe it would be LTL, but they're all employees anyway. The target of this was the drayage community. So, the drayage community can't really leave, okay?
Right.
So the question then goes back to what I just said before, is AB 5, as well as maybe some other things, going to drive ocean-going traffic to other ports? We've seen some evidence of that already, but we can't necessarily cite AB 5 as a reason. So you'd have to see drayage companies decide to pack up. And like I said, the Universal Logistics deal I thought was really important, was really significant, because it was a company that said, we're staying here and we're not going to try to do some kind of end around of this law. We're just going to make these people employees. And by the way, it's going to cost more. And I think they just operated under the assumption that everybody else who was going to try to do maybe that, the 2-check solution or the brokerage solution, which, we've talked about before, that maybe that wasn't going to work. So we'll just do the thing that's most clearly in compliance with the law, and then we're going to move on. So, and I've said also that to really understand how this is going to work, you have to have the state bring some actions against some companies. And when they do, as that's adjudicated, that creates a body of law and more definition on what you can and can't do. Haven't had that yet. But like I said, I really want to get a hold of this LA press release. So anybody out there has it, please send it.
And John, as we ever see a conclusion for this, do we then start to see other states potentially follow in the footsteps, or is this enough of a deterrent to say, hey, you know what, this is a little bit too messy, I'm just going to sit and wait?
Right now, I don't see any of the states moving toward an AB 5 type solution. There was talked about in New Jersey, and I think the ABC test is already embodied or embedded in Massachusetts independent contractor law. Right now, there is no evidence of other states trying to do a very similar AB 5.
And that's something that I think is interesting as well, because as you mentioned, it directly targets the drayage community. So it would make sense to only have those talks where there is a large proponent of independent contractors, like at other ports, so on other coastal states. John, let's talk a little bit about...
Like New Jersey. Like
New Jersey, right. Let's talk a little bit about Prop 22 in respects to this as well. I've got a hearing on Prop 22 coming up later on this week. Is there any connection to that? Obviously, they're both California laws, but as we mentioned last week, Prop 22 was voted in by the constituency, by the residents of California. It was a ballot decision versus a government hand-down.
Right. Okay. So Prop 22 was voted in, I guess, in 2020, and it exempted gig drivers like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash from being under AB5, even though AB5 was primarily passed to go after two groups, gig drivers and truckers. And so then a state court, not a federal court, a state court overturned that on the ground that it was in conflict with the state's workers' compensation law. So don't ask me to explain it. I mean, I read it at the time. I understood it enough at the time to write about it, but, it was a fairly narrow decision, making it unconstitutional. Prop 22 was stayed by the court, which meant that the gig workers still were not under AB5 since. There was an appeal of the court's decision. There is a hearing on that on Thursday. I know later today I'm going to be listening in on a press conference from a group that was a backer of Prop 22. So we'll see what that goes. But so Thursday's the hearing. But let's just point out that the issues involved are fairly narrow. They involve a conflict between workers' compensation and Prop 22. So those are the issues in front of us.
And John, before we let you go, how can people get in touch with you or watch more of your content?
jkingston@freightwaves.com is my email. If you send me that LA press release, I'll really be your best friend, I promise.
That's right. And you also have Drilling Deep, I believe. When that comes out on Fridays, is that right?
Yeah, it came out on Fridays. Last week we had a guy, I'm going to do his name wrong if I do it off the top of my head, so I won't do it. Top executive at A. Dewey Pyle. They just had an expansion of their service. And so I did an interview, not really so much on the expansion, but what does a company go through when it decides to expand? What are the factors it has to consider? It was a really good interview. I mean, I might say so myself, but seriously, he was terrific.
Awesome. I'm going to have to check that one out. John, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Right now, we're going to go over to Kaylee Nix, who has today's look at headlines.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. It's time for our 10 a.m. check of our top stories this morning. Mexico and Canada have recently won a trade dispute against the United States over car content rules that govern auto manufacturing. A dispute resolution panel set up by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement made a preliminary ruling on November 14th, but the full report has not quite been made public yet. The Mexican Undersecretary of Foreign Trade said that the full ruling will be made public in January of this year. The dispute covers different interpretations for calculating a vehicle's regional value content, including classification of its parts. Mexico and Canada have more flexibility in those value calculations, while the U.S. is more strict. The United States Capitol is getting in the Christmas spirit thanks to a delivery from Hardy Brothers Trucking. The company delivered the official Capitol Christmas tree driven by husband and wife team drivers Deb and Ed Kingdon. This is the first time that a female driver has helped to deliver the tree, which boasts as being from the mountains to the sea. The drivers get to make the drop-off in a customized truck, and this was actually the first time that the couple had ever hauled oversized freight. More details have been released about the murder of 7-year-old Athena Strand from Paradise, Texas. According to an arrest affidavit, Tanner Horner accidentally hit Strand with his box truck as he was backing up from making a delivery. In a panic, he put her into his vehicle. Horner admitted to killing the girl, even though that she was not seriously injured from the collision, because she was going to tell her dad about being hit by the truck. Wise County Sheriff Lane Aiken said that local, state, and federal officers used digital evidence and interviews to estimate that Strand died within an hour of her abduction. Massive tonnage declines have continued to hit LTL carrier Yellow Corps with a 25% year-over-year decline in November. Tonnage through the first 2 months of the fourth quarter was down 24% year-over-year, significantly outpacing declines from other asset-based carriers. Part of the falloff is due to the company's consolidation efforts and terminal rationalization. Yellow announced that it sold a terminal during the quarter, booking a gain of $26 million, that the proceeds from that will be used to reduce its debt load of $1.6 billion. Yellow maintains the position that the terminal reduction plan can happen without sacrificing service coverage. And Surface Transportation Chairman Marty Oberman has serious concerns about the lack of data that Union Pacific has provided on its use of embargoes. UP will meet with lawmakers this week to discuss why its embargo use has increased so dramatically in the last 5 years. Normally, railroads use embargoes to control traffic during weather issues or major congestion, but shippers have been reporting slower operations thanks to those embargoes from UP. Oberman said the railroad did not address most of the issues it was ordered to and did not discuss if the embargoes are related to the quality of UPS's resources over the last 5 years. For those headlines and more, you can log on to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe to stay updated. Head on over to social media and do the same thing as well. For the full FreightWaves experience, you can download our app from your app store or log on over to tv.freightwaves.com. After the break, we're going to take another look at weather and we'll put someone on the hot seat.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
So, you need to reroute a large shipment from LA to Boston. With XPO, you can make it happen with one call to right here. An XPO team with local connections that will help find a solution. We've spent over 35 years perfecting LTL freight operations to make it easy for our customers to do business with us. Why? Because we're driven to be the best.
XPO, your freight first.
There, Bert.
The RXO folks want us to demo their technology.
That's smart.
Yeah, not really. My beak doesn't work so well on this tablet.
Well, they're paying us now, so.
I know, here goes. Our customers' freight is seamlessly moved anywhere in North America using RXO's digital platform to access over 1.5 million trucks.
That sounded good.
I think I broke my beak.
Massive capacity, cutting-edge technology. RXO.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our next check of the weather. We started talking about that severe weather threat coming to the Central Plains and then eventually down to the deep south and the Gulf Coast for tomorrow on into Wednesday. And it's going to be kind of a messy situation here, and we've got lots of opportunities for different types and different modes of severe weather throughout these next 2 days. So let's check it out in Sonar right now. We've got up both the radar and your severe weather outlooks from the Storm Prediction Center. So far, we've got 2 areas of interest, a day 1 outlook for today and a day 2 outlook for tomorrow. Day 1 outlook is going to be a slight risk of severe weather. This extends all the way from the I-70 corridor in central Kansas down through western Oklahoma into northwest Texas. This is going to be for some more discrete thunderstorms. This is going to be kind of that leading edge as the cold front from the winter storm sags down to the south-southeast. There's lots of moisture and some decent warmth here across the area, so we could be seeing some discrete thunderstorms popping up, possibly some supercells, but the main activity is going to be farther down to the south-southeast tomorrow night into Wednesday morning. Because of that, we do have both a slight risk and an enhanced risk issued by the Storm Prediction Center. That slight risk covers everywhere from just east of the Dallas Metroplex down through Beaumont, just to the northeast of Houston. Does include New Orleans, Gulfport, Mississippi, and Jackson, Mississippi. The bigger area, the enhanced risk, does include those smaller Louisiana cities of Shreveport, Alexandria, and up to Monroe. But we are going to be seeing some impacts for Interstate 49 as well as Interstate 20 heading east-west. For tomorrow, we're going to be watching some storms pop up in the morning across the central eastern parts of Texas, eventually forming into that line, that kind of squall line that we'll see this time of year and is pretty typical. And with this, threats include some very strong straight line winds. We could be seeing gusts anywhere from 65 up to 80, even 100 miles an hour in some cases. Heavy rainfall, possibly some hail. And as this line gets more developed, it could be also a tornado-producing threat moving into Tuesday night, into Wednesday morning. For these types of winter severe weather threats, especially for us here in the southeast, we typically see them in the evening to overnight hours, which makes it difficult and people can kind of let their guard down. So if you're in any of these areas, northern Louisiana, Mississippi, even here in Tennessee, Alabama, make sure that you are taking those weather preparations seriously. You've got multiple ways to get your warnings and you know your severe weather plan. It's in place. We'll talk about weather one more time before we're done here for the day. Right now, it is time to put someone on the hot seat. Let's check it out.
Welcome into the hot seat where if this isn't overkill, I don't know what is. But we're going to take some unsuspecting individual, give them 10 questions. They don't know what's coming. And today's guest is Matthew Leffler, the armchair attorney. How are you, sir?
I am doing fantastic, Bill. I'm worried you're in Mordor. Is that where you're at right now?
Yeah, we drummed this up and make it a little bit more dramatic, and this is where we're going to go from here. Are you ready for this?
I was born ready. I'm excited. Let's do this thing.
All right, 10 questions for you. First question, always the same, but still want to throw it out there. What is the #1 problem your company or organization is trying to solve?
We're trying to make maintenance better for organizations across North America. Epica Fleet Services is a business that is trying to drive better maintenance practices for commercial vehicles all across the United States. And that's what we're trying to solve for our customers all across the country.
All right, #2, what is the best book you've ever read that has helped you in this industry? And this could not necessarily be a freight book, but could be of any kind of origin.
Raising a Modern Day Knight. It's about fatherhood and that understanding of how to approach people and to teach them and to bring young children into being adults and being men. That book has influenced me in unique and profound ways. So that's the book I would definitely say.
Switching gears completely, what is the best meal you've ever had when on the road? In other words, you make it a road trip, you go and you find someplace, the meal blows you away. What was it and where was it?
You know, I think about having a Maid-Rite over in the Quad Cities when I was visiting one of my favorite customers, one of the greatest trucking companies out there, Dorn Transfer. They're owned by Pitt Ohio Group. And I had the Maid-Rite with my dad because he loved Maid-Rites. These are loose meat sandwiches. If it sounds disgusting, that is what they are. It is designed to be that. It was a terrible meal. A terrible meal. But my father did this with his mother for years, getting Maid-Rites. And in the little city in the Quad Cities, they had a Maid-Rite, and we got a chance to stop and have some.
That sounds absolutely wonderful, from my personal own opinion. #4, name something you think will be mainstream in 10 years that is not mainstream now.
I think it's going to be automation. I mean, we are seeing the cusp of really interesting things happen. We saw Kodiak make that deal with Pilot Flying J, and we're seeing that automation is not something that is far, far away. It is knocking on our door right now, and over the next 5-10 years, that technology will be ubiquitous in how we move freight.
All right, speaking of moving, let's say you're on a 1,000-mile road trip, you're stuck in the cab, you have one podcast that you can listen to other than your own. What would it be?
Hardcore History with Dan Carlin. If you have not heard of Hardcore History with Dan Carlin, do yourself a favor. Each episode is 4 to 5 hours long.
Wow.
And you will listen to it and you will say, why isn't it longer? His series on World War I, Blueprint for Armageddon, is over, I think, 20 hours, but it is absolutely phenomenal storytelling. That is the podcast I recommend everybody check out.
Wow. All right, number 6. What company in freight, besides your own again, are you most impressed with right now?
I gotta say Steam Logistics, and it's not so much about what they're doing in the business sense. I mean, they seem to be a great freight brokerage company. I admire that, but their stance and their activism along non-competition agreements. These documents that have ruined so many lives for so many people for so long. I mean, in the United States, maybe 30 million people have some iteration of a non-competition agreement. And what Steve has started with the End Non-Competes movement and the magnitude of the followers behind that, I think that is one of the best things we're going to see out of freight at any company, is what they're doing over there.
All right. And this question, by the way, this next question specifically tailored for you. What one law you'd like to see the federal government change with regard to the freight industry?
Oh my goodness. That's a really tough question. So what laws do we not necessarily like? What modifications? I will say,
gotta pick one.
I am not a fan of the apprenticeship driver program. I do not think that we should have people under the age of 21 operating interstate commerce, driving trucks. The challenge we have as an industry, finding more bodies or more meat for the grinder, is not solved by young people that are not trained in mountains, that are not trained in weather, and they're not trained at night. These are things that are just a recipe for something catastrophic. So that would be the one thing, if I could focus on anything, that would be the one thing I would say.
Well put there. Number 8, if you could add one class or perhaps teach one class at a college or university that is needed for supply chain majors to complete, what would it be? What would you add to the curriculum?
Negotiation.
Okay.
Every single person needs to benefit from learning how to properly negotiate, not with your customers or your vendors, but with your employer. That same thing we talk with Steam Logistics on non-competition agreements. You train someone to negotiate properly, they're not going to have to sign those documents. So that is the thing I would say more than anything, is how do we get people to be more comfortable negotiating for themselves?
All right, number 9, wild card question here for you. Think hard. Best FreightWaves TV personality.
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble. You're going to get me in trouble.
That's why I got the fire behind me.
I'll have to say, Grace and Blythe.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's got to be, I love Grace. I love Blythe. I can't say both. Those are the two people I love the most. Absolutely.
All right. Okay.
And you, Bill. I say you. Can I just have you be you?
Oh, I come in a distant third. Come on.
All right, that's the pantheon right there.
Last one. Complete this sentence. Freight is blank.
Hard. Freight is hard. This business is not easy. It has never been easy. There is nothing more difficult than safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. And if you think you can come in this business and it's not going to be difficult, you will be surprised. It is not easy, but it's necessary. And I love the men and women that keep our country moving.
Matt Leffler, you are off the hot seat.
Yeah, we did it.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
This is an LTL freight cross-dock facility, and we have locations like this all across North America. East Coast, West Coast, even our neighbors to the north and south. At XPO, our network helps us deliver 18 billion pounds of freight every year to 99% of US zip codes and beyond. And now, it's getting even bigger because we're adding 900 new doors to our terminals. XPO, your freight first.
Canard so get truckloads of grass to Pittsburgh every month?
Who do you know in Pittsburgh?
Lots of cousins. Always complaining about the grass there.
The grass is bad in Pittsburgh.
Right? It's bitter, like a cruciferous vegetable.
Well, with RXO, you can access over 1.5 million trucks, any mode of transportation, even flatbeds. Just log in.
There's a log right there.
You know what cruciferous means, but not log in?
I'm a complicated creature.
Massive capacity, cutting edge technology. RXO.
Welcome into the final carrier update of the morning. Donnie, going to get into our lanes of the day. Looking here, starting, we saw this popping up. We saw it in volumes, higher year over year, rejection rates higher week over week. We're seeing rates pick up accordingly out of Savannah.
Yep, so you gave it away here a little while ago. And, a lot of stuff out of the Savannah market's going to move up to the major market for that area. So I went ahead and chose just a short run, Savannah to Atlanta, roughly 250 miles. And as you see here, it's picked up here a little bit lately here, and with good reason. If you see the rejection rates and the volumes picking up, this is picked up to $6.54 a mile. Sounds huge. Well, it kind of is. Not as big as what you think, but because this is a shorter run, this is probably a $800,000, $900,000 run. Well, it's up to about $1,600 right now.
Yep.
So refrigerated freight out of Savannah heading up to the Atlanta area is a pretty good run now. And even at that rate, even how it might be a cheaper rate going back, depending on what the rate is, you can almost comparing it to the old rates, you can almost swing this going empty back if you had to. So good lane to keep in mind here. You see what we saw. Use your market dashboards and test these theories, or test what's best for you.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you deadhead, right? It's $3 or $3.25 a mile.
Still, both directions.
Both directions. So even if you deadhead one direction, from Atlanta back to Savannah, it's still pretty darn good.
Yep. Let's look at another lane here right quick here. We talked about Seattle. So let's say we're starting out in Los Angeles. We have a contracted rate going Los Angeles to Seattle. So yes, this is paying $282, but you accept your freight going up to Seattle at the contracted rate, which will help you out on that big fuel bill. You'll run up to Seattle. If you try to run it through the spot rates, you're roughly $282. But hit my little double arrows there and reverse this lane, and also be sure that your reefer's turned on when you're looking at reefer. And we're coming Seattle back. Well, it's come down a little bit, but it's still $3.10 a mile coming out of Seattle. Quite different than this back in September, $1.50 here, moving up to around that $2 range. This is still pretty difficult to swallow here just because fuel rates are the highest on the West Coast and in the Northeast. But still, if you got a good rate going up, you could come back around that 225 mark and still be close to, profitable. But getting up here to the 310 mark, this could be a good run for you.
Yeah, especially when, this is that backhaul market, like you said, 10 months out of the year. That's where you see rates that's why you see the rates at $1.50 back in July, August, September. Well, now is that time where capacity up in the Pacific Northwest tightens up, right? Because you've got apples, Christmas trees, all of these goods that come out of that area predominantly. Well, now's that season that they're coming out, and you're seeing it reflected in the rates.
Yeah, just keep an eye on Kaylee Nix's weather reports here. You do not want to get caught up in the snow up in that area. One more here right quick. We get in Dallas to Memphis. This is surprising. You talked about Dallas. Well, run Dallas to Memphis, a shorter run, or not too short, it's 450, but 345 a mile. Reverse this here right quick. Memphis back to Dallas, still at 313. This is a good, almost 500-mile run each direction, and you're over $3 a mile.
Yeah, awesome stuff, Donnie. Thank you so much for the updates. We'll be sure to check in with you again tomorrow. Right now, we'll toss it over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Guys, that's it for Carrier this morning. We're going to welcome in our last live guest and switching things up, bringing our net zero carbon segment to Monday of this week. We've got Tyler Cole joining us here from Nashville. Tyler, thanks for coming on the show today and talking a little bit about what we've learned this last year around the environmental scene. What can you tell us?
You know, it's been a busy year. We've all seen a lot more continued effects of climate change going on, weather events, storms, wildfires. I don't think that's going to stop next year, but it's important to look back, as you say, and see where we've come. So over the last 12 months, you know, we've seen a Tesla EV come out. We've seen a lot of positive policy passed to support decarbonization in freight and logistics, whether that's the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, some other state and local level initiatives that are really putting a lot of capital behind a lot of these new technologies like electrification, like infrastructure, like low carbon fuels, like digitizing the supply chain, mapping your supply chain, mapping climate risk. You know, we've seen the SEC proposal come out on greenhouse gas reporting and risk mitigation, and we'll see what 2023 brings as far as executing on some of those proposed announcements that could drive a lot of change next year.
Definitely excited for a lot of the change. And Tyler, what are going to be some of the big things that you expect to really be carried over into the new year, and really that's just going to be on the forefront?
I think it's going to continue the trend of increased reporting and transparency. I think we're going to see the SEC finalize their rulemaking. Now, whether that includes Scope 3, how much, by what timeline, is still up in the air. But I don't think anybody should anticipate the need for transparent greenhouse gas reporting to slow down, whether you're a carrier, whether you're a shipper trying to assess your carriers. I think that's going to continue. I also think you're going to continue to see investment in alternative fuel technologies. You know, we've seen a lot of e-methanol for ocean liners starting to buy vessels. We've seen, SAF and sustainable aviation fuel as a big opportunity for people to invest and get that technology to scale. What I hope that we see along those lines is continued kind of buying cooperation among big shippers, big maybe fleet coalitions to say, look, we'll send a demand signal, we'll pool our resources, and we'll try and bring this technology sooner. I mean, guys, if we think about, there's probably less than 100 Class 8 semis on the road here in the U.S. today. Everybody's talking about them. There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of regulations saying you should expect them to come sooner than later. But we really need to see that scale happen. So that's what I hope really starts picking up momentum in 2023, that supply chain kinks get worked out, we get more trucks on the road, and we start to get those learnings processed so we can move the ball faster down the field.
And Tyler, of course, we have our domestic supply chain summit this week, and one of the conversations I had for this summit evolved around the staying power of venture capital with freight tech. And very specifically, our conversation delved into the staying power of venture capital for freight tech focused on ESG goals, specifically on that environment piece of things. And the person that I spoke with, Natan Reddy from Iron Spring Ventures, also said, you know, that's not going to go away anytime soon. And honestly, there's just going to be more pinpoint focus on how can you invest in ESG, how can you invest in tech that gets you closer to ESG, not only from a freight standpoint, but just from kind of a societal standpoint. Do you think that that's something that's here to stay as well? Maybe even as markets cool and things turn a little bit more conservative on the VC and investing space, people are still going to be putting money into, as you mentioned, scaling these companies that have these great ideas.
Absolutely right. And we see it on a lot of the climate tech reporting as far as what's available, as far as dry capital. We continue to see funds raised focused on this, right? Moving supply chains to more sustainable solutions. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that are even just recently being announced that are going to be allocated over the next 2 to 3 years into these sort of technologies. And where I think you'll see a difference, Kaylee, to your point about why this has staying power, is in a macro environment where we're seeing rising rates, you're going to be forced to get a return on some of this technology, which almost limits your ability to go super hard into scaling the typical blitz scale model of a SaaS like B2B or B2C company. You're going to want to see some hard tech capital, hard tech solutions be scaled with capital that can actually see a return in displacing market share in things like trucking and rail and fuels. there's still going to be a huge tech component to that. We're still going to need to digitize and understand what we're displacing and how the emissions get quantified and even measured as far as what's the return on the emissions we're abating, right? How are we going to invest capital and show our investors we're actually not just growing GDP, we're actually reducing emissions at the same time. So yeah, I think that trend definitely continues well into 2023 and beyond.
And Tyler, as we look through 2022, what are going to be some of the biggest lessons learned that you think we've taken away from this year?
My biggest one for operators and startups is this is a disruption moment. This is a moment where if you're leaning into a tech solution that's going to allow us to do more with less, especially less emissions, I think you've got a real opportunity to displace incumbents. And if you're an incumbent in any of these spaces around the sustainable supply chain and you're not looking at how you change your operations to be more environmentally friendly, you're going to get displaced pretty soon. We now have an industrial policy here in the US that is moving this direction, whether you want to or not. So you need to be figuring out how to deploy resources to make sure you stay ahead of that curve, because there are a lot of people trying to displace incumbents in this space. So that's my number one takeaway is fleets and the ecosystem around fleets need to be thinking about how they're going to survive in a net zero future. Now is the time to do that. And you've got plenty of tailwinds to help you do that, whether it's VC, like Kaylee just mentioned, or whether it's just federal or state, local incentives or policies. Like, there's real business opportunity here to be had if you're willing to take the risk and move the ball forward down the field faster.
Was there anything that you were anticipating coming out of 2022 that we didn't see happen that was maybe a little surprising? I know like a lot of companies put forth some pretty lofty goals. Then we saw this market turn in the middle of the year, and that obviously had people pull back, whether that was with layoffs or cutting budgets, et cetera, cutting projects. Was there anything that you were expecting to happen that just didn't come to fruition?
I mean, my number one wish that didn't happen was we didn't get clear policy around how we're going to allow transmission for all of this new renewable energy we're going to be producing. That's the biggest bottleneck I see in order to get like true net zero electrified solutions into the supply chain. That's obviously not something that happens overnight. They're going to keep working on that and try to, ease that bottleneck. The other thing I didn't see that I think was disappointing is we have a lot of bottlenecks in the supply chain that are just now starting to unwind, and that's a result of the war and lingering effects of the pandemic. But I think we would have seen a lot more passenger EVs come to the market sooner, and hopefully more semi solutions coming as well. Medium duty trucks on the road. Had we had better supply chain fluidity, right? And that's just a state of the environment we lived in for the last 2 to 3 years. So it's starting to ease now. I hope we see that continue into next year.
And kind of leaning on that a little bit more, Tyler, are there any trends that you see as a whole and you're just like, you know what, we need to pump our brakes on this one because this is still a long ways out, but still something that we're excited about overall in 2022 going into 2023? The first thing, of course, that comes to my mind is electrification of semis, but is there anything else that kind of comes to mind for you?
I would say we probably want to pour gas on that fire instead of pump the brakes, but the caveat to that is we just got to set expectations accordingly. Like, that's the biggest battle we have in ESG in general, whether it's like the public investing backlash, whether it's electrification, whether it's, there was a big nuclear announcement that came out just yesterday about a huge fusion breakthrough. The problem is we're dealing on such long time frames for a lot of this technology. We really have to make sure we're making, here in the media especially, appropriate and relevant claims as to what we can truly expect. Like even using the word displacing incumbents that I'm just using, that's the longer term opportunity for people. You're not going to do that with 2 EVs on the road at a port. It's just not going to happen. But that's the direction we need to be moving, and we've got to balance that need for urgency and wanting to highlight wins versus the hard reality that we have a long uphill. This is a marathon, right? Not a sprint that we're trying to win. So that's my biggest takeaway is continue to be educated, continue to increasingly become technical in your understanding of what it means to be net zero, and appreciate the nuance, and let's just try and avoid, the polarizing extremes.
In that marathon, obviously, a lot of the support comes from a government side of things. We flipped the House back into Republican control. We now have steady control of Democratic-led Senate, and of course, we still have a Democratic president for the next 2 years. So now we're split 2-1 on Democrats versus Republicans. Are we going to be seeing any issues or maybe a tougher time passing legislation now that we have that 2-1 split?
Yeah, I think you'll expect it to be slower on passage of new legislation. Like, I don't think the IRA would have passed in this current makeup of the Congress, but it is passed and it is law now. And so what we might see over the next 2 years is a little bit more review of policies, review of administrative agencies' control, right? How we've seen this with the Supreme Court recently flipping some of the EPA's ability to control greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. We should continue to expect that sort of scrutiny in this mixed Congress, but I don't anticipate that we're going to see clawback of policies or any major new environmental policies passed, with the exception of maybe some give and take in order to ease things like transmission, which, fingers crossed, is something we get across the finish line.
Awesome. Tyler, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Real quick, before we let you go, when can people catch you on Net Zero Carbon?
Fridays at 1 p.m. Tune in, all streaming podcast players. We've got some great episodes coming up with a look at the European freight markets and South American freight markets. And then we're going to get into some quick, easy wins that shippers can do to lower costs and emissions. So definitely tune in.
Awesome. I'm going to be looking forward to it, Tyler. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, John.
Right now, we're going to toss it back over to Kaylee Nix, who has our next look at weather.
All right, time for one final check of your weather here. And we talked about some of the narrow specific impacts of this winter storm across the northern plains, from the blizzard warnings to the winter storm warnings, all the way from the Dakotas down through Kansas. But it's already ramping up for the southwestern parts of the United States as well, bringing some heavy rainfall to coastal California, some snowfall to the mountains of California, and snow down through Colorado, Utah, and into Arizona as well. Check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We do have winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories, high wind advisories in place all across central New Mexico. Out to the west in Arizona, winter weather advisories in place in Flagstaff, along that I-40 corridor, even down towards Phoenix Mesa, where they're seeing rain down in the city, wintry mix up in those higher elevations, and then snow in the highest parts of the Arizona mountains there. That I-40 corridor between Flagstaff and the New Mexico border getting pretty treacherous for travel this morning, as temperatures there are down into just at that freezing point. So road temperatures are kind of hovering between just above freezing and just below. Could be finding slick spots as well as some accumulating snow on the roadways there in those highest elevations. But we are seeing some decent accumulating snow on the grassy surfaces and the other places around those roads. Folks out in Flagstaff already seen between 6 and 8 inches of snow in some places. Further out towards the west, we've got heavy rainfall going on from California, Los Angeles down into the San Diego area, and then up in those highest elevations, I-10 through San Bernardino, I-5 out of the Santa Clarita area, seeing some snow, some wintry mix, and because of that, we also have winter storm warnings in place for those highest elevations and winter weather advisories in place around that snowfall. So, like I said, broad-reaching impacts from this winter storm. Going to be everywhere from the mountains of Washington and Oregon in through Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. Basically, if you're in the West, expect difficult, if not impossible travel. Some really tough conditions out there through the next 2 days or so. Even some lingering conditions as the snow accumulates, and it takes a little bit for it to melt because we'll have that blast of cold air moving on in behind the initial precipitation. That's it for weather today. We're going to keep an eye out on the severe weather moving in tomorrow, and we'll talk about that on tomorrow's edition of FreightWaves Now. We're going to hand it back over to Isaiah Buchanan for our final check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and yesterday was a historic day for NASA. Their Orion spacecraft splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Take a look at this video that they posted on Twitter. So this spacecraft was really important because it was sent on a mission around the moon, an uncrewed mission to go around the moon. It traveled around 1.4 million miles. It was to gather data and make sure that this Orion spacecraft was actually safe for astronauts to travel in. So it splashed down yesterday. On its trip, it got up to 32 times the speed of sound, and that caused the outside of that spacecraft to get up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So hopefully the data that was collected from this trip will allow the future of space travel to continue to advance to help us to get to the moon and then maybe even to Mars. I know that's some really long-term plans for NASA, but we'll continue to keep an eye on that and keep you updated here at FreightWaves. Switching things up a little bit, we have been talking about favorite Christmas movies, favorite Christmas snacks, and now we're talking about favorite Christmas candy. So candystore.com put out this chart right here, and it displays each state's favorite Christmas candy. Now, they surveyed 16,000 customers, distributors, and manufacturers to compile this chart together. Now, in Tennessee, right here in Freight Alley, peppermint bark was actually #1 on the list, followed by candy canes and chocolate Santas. And then you'll notice that chocolate is actually really big around most of the states: Hershey's, Snickers, Reese's, and then chocolate Santas are all very popular around this time of year. So chocolate making its way up there and taking over some of the throne that peppermint bark has had over the past several years. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. But right now, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to look at some of the top stories trending on FreightWaves.com.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Hold on a second, Tony. See that? No scrapes, no scuffs, no damage. Thank you. Because we make sure each pallet is touched as few times as possible and that is handled with care, no matter where it's going. That's the precision you get from a nationwide LTL freight company with over 35 years of industry-leading experience, an entire team that's driven to deliver on time and damage-free.
XPO, your freight, first.
What are you doing up there, Bert?
The RXO folks want us to demo their technology.
That's smart.
Yeah, not really. My beak doesn't work so well on this tablet.
Well, they're paying us now, so...
I know, here goes. Our customers' freight is seamlessly moved anywhere in North America using RXO's digital platform to access over 1.5 million trucks.
That sounded good.
I think I broke my beak.
Massive capacity, cutting-edge technology. RXO.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. Time for one final check of your top stories this morning. Massive tonnage declines have continued to hit LTL carrier Yellow Corp with a 25% year-over-year decline in November. Tonnage through the first 2 months of the fourth quarter was down 24% year-over-year, significantly outpacing declines from other asset-based carriers. Part of the falloff is due to the company's consolidation efforts and terminal rationalization. Yellow announced that it sold a terminal during the quarter, booking a gain of $26 million, and the proceeds from that will be used to reduce its debt load of $1.6 billion. Yellow maintains the position that the terminal reduction plan can happen without sacrificing service coverage across the country. Surface Transportation Board Chairman Barney Oberman has serious concerns about the lack of data that Union Pacific has provided on its use of embargoes. UP will meet with lawmakers this week to discuss why its embargo use has increased so dramatically over the last 5 years. Normally, railroads use embargoes to control traffic during weather issues or congestion, but shippers have been reporting slower operations thanks to those embargoes. Oberman said that UP did not address most of the issues when it was ordered to, did not discuss that the embargoes are related to the quantity of UP's resources over the last 5 years. And Amazon is rolling out a new way to thank its drivers with the Alexa program, Thank My Driver. Customers can give the order to their Alexa machine, and the delivery driver will receive an additional $5 from the company. The feature will apply to the first 1 million thank yous, and the 5 drivers with the most acknowledgments will get $10,000 for themselves and for a charity of their choosing. However, this good news comes as a lawsuit was filed against Amazon for allegedly misusing tips intended for drivers. The suit says that customers thought that they were tipping delivery drivers, but it was actually going to boost profits and support labor costs from Amazon itself. You can find those headlines and more up on FreightWaves.com and on the FreightWaves app. For the full experience, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com. That's where you can live today for some exciting content coming up for the rest of the day, because even though we're done here on FreightWaves Now, we're not quite done for you.
That's right. The fun keeps on going. In just about an hour, we're going to have What the Truck with the Dooner himself. So he's going to be entertaining and really going to keep us on our toes for about an hour.
Absolutely. It's the last week of What the Truck for the year also. So Christmas celebrations abound here on FreightWaves TV. You can catch that at noon. Following that, you saw Mike Baudendistel earlier, and he will be here with the Stock Out, his show all about the state of CPG, coming up at 2 o'clock. Following that, we've got the Drop Zone with Jack Dalio, our writer for Modern Shipper and drone expert.
That's right. And while you're at it, we have a little bit of time, so you can go to live.freightwaves.com right now and get registered, because we have a virtual event coming up this week, and that's going to be the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. And it's not too late to get registered, and of course, it is free of charge.
Well, you're on a tight budget for Christmas this year, Anthony.
I am. No one's getting anything.
Consumers are pulling back on their spending, and good news, you don't have to fork out any money for the Domestic Supply Chain Summit. You just head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for that virtual event, free like all of our other virtual events as well, but you can still get a gift.
That's
if
right.
You register.
There's a giveaway that's going on. You're going to be eligible for this giveaway. It's going to be a Sonos speaker set, and they have some high quality audio. I'm a little bit jealous about this one.
Some good sound coming out of those speakers. So all you have to do is register for the event. You can increase your chances of winning by being active in those live chats and networking with the friends that maybe you made at a FreightWaves in-person event this year.
It's also a great networking opportunity. Get ready for 2023 and all the events that we have there as well.
Absolutely. We will see you guys tomorrow morning starting live at 9 right here on FreightWaves TV. Have a great rest of your Monday.
This is an LTL freight cross-dock facility, and we have locations like this all across North America. East Coast, West